51. We're going to have a story coming up about Grant Shapps. And if that doesn't keep the radio on, then I don't know what will. Cormac is in Kennington. Cormac, got something to say about Ukraine, not Grant Shapps.
Lewis, thanks very much for having me on. And can I say today of all days, when we need to get a bit of clarity around the truth, thank you for the way you're conducting this conversation on Ukraine. And of course, there's no one better you could have on than the great Lee Turner, a former colleague of mine, actually a former ambassador to Ukraine.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, he is. I have huge respect for Lee. Look, I was seething with rage earlier, you know, when the Russian commentator on, and then when the caller came on from Budapest.
Yes.
I'll tell you what I want to say. 3.5 years ago, just after this invasion, I sat down with one of my best Ukrainian friends, a man called Alexei Mikheyev. He's currently the ambassador, the ambassador to Berlin for Ukraine. Right. And we said, let us identify the 5 biggest lies which Russia tells and useful idiots amplify. And if I can give them to you quickly and to the listeners, I'd really urge people to bear these in mind. 1, it was all NATO's fault. It was about NATO expansion. It wasn't. There was never a binding undertaking given. Finland, you talked about, has a border of 1,340 kilometres with Russia. When they first joined NATO 2 years ago, Russia started to pull back from their border. Donbass was never a civil war. This is the Russian narrative that they had to go into and help the Russian separatists. It was always a war that was fomented by Russia. There was also the lie that, Maidan was a US-backed coup. That was the Maidan Revolution of Dignity in 2013-14. It wasn't. And of course, there was genocide and victimization of the Russian-speaking minority. You mentioned Mariupol. I have a friend who fought in the defense of Mariupol, was captured and tortured for 2 years. Before getting out, and a former British soldier, Sean Pinner.
I've interviewed women from Mariupol whose husbands and sons were all killed in the iteration of it. There's nothing left of their home. So when these talking points that come up that somehow none of this exists, it's not just post-truth. It's horrific.
Look, I mean, remember, Mariupol is a city the size of Edinburgh, 500,000 people. It has been wiped off the map. The most conservative estimate is 25,000 civilians murdered. Estimates go to over 100,000, with 95% of the buildings wiped out. And that was a Russian-speaking city where the politics before the further invasion was very, very Russian-friendly.
Yes, this is the irony, which I've been pointing out to people all morning, which is that the region and part of Ukraine which were had the greatest proclivity towards Russia, most sympathetic to Russia, have been the bits that Russia has decided to basically completely destroy.
I have spoken to, I know many Ukrainians, and many I count as my close friends. I've spoken to Ukrainians who said before the invasion they were very pro-Russian. They've now turned 180 degrees. They have cut off family ties from family in Russia and so on. And of course, the 5th lie is Ukraine is full of Nazis.
Yeah.
When 2019, the far right, there's far right in every country, as you know, in Europe, the far right banded together to maximize their vote, and they got 2.04% of the vote, while Volodymyr Zelensky, a Jew of Russian origin and Russian speaking, got 73% of the vote in an election that was invigilated by the West and judged to be true and fair. There is not a Western democratic leader could dream of getting 73% of the popular vote. Some Nazi country.
Cormac, I'm really grateful to you for puncturing a few myths there. It's very, very, very helpful because they come up all of the time. And just specifically on that point that Cormac brings up about the real horror of Russian propaganda talking about Ukraine being full of Nazis. When they invoke that, they do so. Nazism is obviously, and Nazis are deeply powerful, politically potent terms throughout Europe, but nowhere more so